everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. We have a wonderful radio show today. We're going to spend part of the first hour talking about the Reagans and Nancy Reagan with two of the greatest guests one could possibly have on this subject, Craig Shirley, if not the top, one of the top historians and biographers of the Reagans, dear friend of mine, and John Heubusch, the executive director of the Reagan Library, who worked very closely with Nancy Reagan, was hired by Nancy Reagan to turn that library into a spectacular place. And if you haven't been there, you really need to make the time to go. I know some people say, let's put Reagan behind us and let's move forward. That's like saying put Washington and Lincoln behind us. They're behind us. But there's a hell of a lot we can learn from them and should learn from them. Otherwise, what are we going to do? Follow Reince Priebus? So I think this is important, and it's important to take a little bit of time and remember why they're important and why Nancy Reagan was important. And she was greatly important. As a matter of fact, she was the hand behind the Reagan Library, organizing it and getting the right people there, outstanding organization there. And she had a lot of influence over President Reagan during the course of his presidency. And she was a conservative for the most part, too. In fact, before he was. Her stepfather, Dr. Davis, a very well-known surgeon, he moved them all to Chicago, or outside of Chicago. He had a great influence on Nancy. And she had a lot of influence on Ron. And Ron had a lot of influence on us. So it's all very important that we remember our history, particularly we conservatives. There's not a lot of people we can point to in recent history. And what a couple. You know, I don't mean to be rude or anything of that sort, but when you look at the Obamas, you don't get the same sense of partnership. You just don't. He's traveling by himself all the time. I don't even know where she is right now. They don't even show her much, but he's traveling all the time by himself. That was the exception for Ronald Reagan. And after he got shot through the assassination attempt, she really didn't want to be away from him. But it looks like Michelle can't wait to be away from Obama. I don't know what's going on there. All the lib reporting, hey, what's he saying? I don't know. Ask them. Where are they? Why aren't they together more? Craig Shirley, the biographer of biographers, his expertise really is Ronald Reagan, the Reagan presidency, the Reagan family. Craig Shirley, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. You know, we're good friends. We've been friends for many, many years.
Yep.
You've written excellent books on the Reagans. I want to focus in on Nancy Reagan. What are the biggest things you think she contributed to the Reagan presidency?
Well, probably the biggest thing is what she's least recognized for. I mean, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there that she ended the Cold War and she, you know, whispered in Gromyko's ear. But really, it was the 10 years of which she was suffering with Alzheimer's when she was away from the crowds and away from the glare of the light and just working tirelessly day in and day out to take care of him and to comfort him and as he spiraled down into the abyss of Alzheimer's and really it took a terrible toll on her physically and psychologically, and it took a long time for her to recover, and she never really recovered, of course, and she never recovered emotionally.
Yeah, that's a hell of a disease, and for her to take such a central involvement in that, I don't think people understand how remarkable that is.
It would have been easy to, for him to go in an institution or something like that, but, not only did she insist that he stay at home where she could care for him daily, she had meals with him daily. They converted his den on the first floor into a bedroom. But she rarely left the state. She didn't want to be away from him in case something happened. She would go into Los Angeles occasionally to have lunch with her girlfriends or whatever. But other than that, she stayed very, very close to him for those 10 years. And really, it's almost like an O. Henry story, Mark. She was trying to will him back by giving him a part of her life.
Mm-hmm. Did you get to talk to her much as you wrote your books and did your studies, or meet her and so forth?
No, but she was extremely, extremely helpful. You know, there were a lot of sealed files at the Reagan Library that hadn't been cataloged yet, so they were not available to for any researchers. But she told the library to open them up exclusively for my use for my books on 76 and 80 campaign, and then my last book on the post-presidency. So there's a lot of material in there in all three books that has never seen the light of days. We corresponded frequently. I got a letter from her just about several months ago when I sent her a copy of my new book, Last Act. And I remember June a year ago, it was the 10-year anniversary of his passing, and the library had a day-long conference and a number of Reagan scholars, including myself. And after the wreath-laying ceremony at Reagan's tomb, my wife Serena and I were asked to go and say hello to Mrs. Reagan, so just briefly. So we went, and of course she was in a wheelchair, but the eyes were twinkly. You know, there was a glint, in the eyes and a smile on her face, and the grip was firm and sure. And I bent down to her, and Serena bent down to her, and she just patted my hand. She said, "Thank you for all you're doing for Ronnie's legacy." And then she was wheeled into the elevator and whisked away. And I turned to Serena. I said, "Did she just say what I think she said?" And Serena said, "Yeah, she said what you think she said."
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Let me ask you this: what are the key characteristics about her that make her different than so many other first ladies, do you think?
Toughness, wryness, a great sense of humor and a sense of irony. In 1980, on the campaign plane, she would go through the press section and hand out chocolate to the traveling press. Well, Judy Bacharach, who was a very tough, some said mean, columnist for the Old Washington Star, wrote a column eviscerating Mrs. Reagan for handing out chocolates to the traveling press. The next day, after the column appeared, Mrs. Reagan was traveling through the press section, handing out chocolate, and around her neck was a sign that said, "Take one, or else." She knew how to push back.
And she was very protective of her husband, wasn't she?
Oh, sure. You know, that was she understood. I think she understood, and we haven't really intellectualized this yet, Mark, is that she understood her role as First Lady, that the health and well-being of the country was so dependent on the health and well-being of the president. So it was her job to make sure, and I don't mean his diet or his sleep or whatever, but that his psychology was healthy, and that he was optimistic, and that he was happy to be married and happy to get up in the morning and looking forward to life and looking forward to life with her, because is that a happy country is a productive country, and a productive country is a growing country, and a growing country produces the war material to defeat Soviet empires, and that's what Jimmy Carter never understood. That has been part of the American psyche for over 200 years, is that we've always been a happy and productive country.
And she liked to say that when they first met, it was love at first sight for her, and she had to kind of prod him along a little bit, but it didn't take much.
No,
how would you know too?
Yeah, no, and he was wounded. He had just broken up with Jane Wyman, and that distressed him terribly. He didn't want the divorce. He tried to reconcile several times. Jane Wyman didn't want to do so. His movie career was starting to tail down in the late 40s, early 50s. He hadn't signed yet his deal with GE in 1954. He'd also had a terrible accident at a charity softball game where he broke his femur in several places. So the first date was actually he was on crutches, but he was his self worth, his self respect, his view of himself wasn't the greatest at the time, and so she really helped him along in that regard, and I think that he always felt that she had come along at a time when he needed her the most.
And I know what made him angrier than anything else were the cheap shots in the media against his wife, whether it was China, where they actually raised the money privately, whether it was the gown she wore, which she borrowed from designers. She was trying to bring back a level of, I won't even say glamour, but respectability and so forth to the White House that the Carters had lost.
Right, just a style and grace. And again, it was part of the whole psyche of the American people. I think is that they understood the American people wanted to be proud of their president. They wanted to be proud of their White House, and that they'd lost that pride with the malaise of Jimmy Carter, who depomped the White House, stopped playing ruffles and flourishes, stopped wearing black tie to state dinners, and wore business suits, and carried his own luggage and stuff like that. They didn't want the president to carry his own luggage, I don't think. And so the Reagans understood that and brought that back. And I think it was the right thing to do, but it was also good for the psychology of the country.
Well, Craig, Shirley, I appreciate this. I just want the public to know before too much time passes what a wonderful woman this was.
Yes.
I worked in the administration 8 years, and her presence was known, and I don't mean that in a fearful way. I mean that in a very, very positive way. She was the rock to Reagan.
Absolutely. Through the assassination attempt, she was there every morning, there every night. She took measures to make sure the Secret Service increased their protection of Ronnie. And he was fiercely, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, is that he stormed in his diaries and he stormed in letters about the unfair coverage that she got from the Washington Post.
All right, Craig. Good man, Craig Shirley. He's a good man every day, by the way. Thank you, my friend. When we come back, we're scheduled to have John Heubusch, Executive Director of the Reagan Library. I'll be right back.
The Mark Levin Show, where the Reagan Coalition meets every day. Call now, 877-381-3811.
Well, it's a great honor to have my dear friend John Heubusch on the program, Executive Director of the Reagan Foundation and Library. John, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Mark. Normally I'm kind of upbeat when you and I talk, but as you know, there's a lot of reason to be sad around here today, so... but we'll make it through. We have a lot of plans to honor Mrs. Reagan as best we possibly can, and but it's good to talk to you about it. Maybe it's a little bit of therapy for me.
Now, John, you worked with her fairly closely, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. I ran the president and her foundation and library, and she was very, very active in the library, in the front of the scenes, behind the scenes. It was like her second home, really, and it was just such an honor and a privilege, really, to work for someone of that caliber who was really the force, as you know, Mark, that helped make President Reagan the success that he was. And so I just think that many Americans owe her a debt of gratitude. She was with the president through thick and thin, and now she's laid to rest right beside him, or she will be, and then she'll be up there with him in heaven.
Do we know when she'll be laid to rest next to him at the library?
We do, Mark. It's going to be at 11 o'clock this Friday. And unfortunately, it's an invitation-only type event. And obviously, as you can imagine, there'll be many, many thousands of people that would like to attend the funeral. We just don't have the space. But the good news is that on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, the public... anyone who wants to come and pay the respects to Mrs. Reagan are able to come up to the library, and where Mrs. Reagan will be lying in repose in the center of the library, and she'll be in casket, and people will be able to walk by and say their goodbyes, and I think it'll be a lovely service, a lovely event. From 1 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Wednesday, and 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock on Thursday will be the times that people will come by and say goodbye to Mrs. Reagan.
When was the last time you saw her? Have you seen her recently?
Yeah, I saw her. I was on the phone with her a couple of weeks ago about something, and it was personal to me. And last time I saw her was at her birthday party. We had a party out at her home in Bel Air, and she was just looking terrific, and it was fun. It was a big cake, and she blew out all the candles and was smiling. And a lot of people didn't see her very much in these last few years, and but they should know that while she was very frail and didn't go out too much, she was 110% in the brain department. I mean, she read the papers every day. She'd watch the news. She watched Fox. She just, just was stayed up to speed on all politics and everything that was happening. So it was whenever you had a conversation with her, it was always an in-depth one, and she was really just entertaining to be with.
Now, you would show her the list of speakers. Did she have to approve them, or she was just interested in knowing who they were at the Reagan Library?
Yes, she had to approve. If you were a mate, it's an honor to speak at this library. We don't pay people thousands of dollars. You know that, Mark. You've been here many times, but you don't speak at the Reagan Library unless Mrs. Reagan personally approves. And Mark, you were personally approved by Mrs. Reagan 4 times, so you can take that as a measure of respect that she had for you. You've always been one of our most popular guests, and we've just been delighted always to have you.
Well, I didn't know that. She had approved me 4 times?
Oh, yeah.
That's
every
pretty
single
cool.
time. Yeah, absolutely.
Did she get an after-action report?
More than that.
Speakers?
Mark, what she would do when she couldn't come to an event, we would always set it up to where she could watch the event live on her computer at home. And if the timing wasn't right, we would just tape it for her, and she would watch it afterwards. So,
isn't that amazing?
She's seen all of the appearances here, including yours.
How about that? I didn't scare her away. That's a good thing. But I'll tell you why, because as many years as I worked in the Reagan administration, I met her a handful of times, and not really on a substantive basis, because, you're working for the president or the attorney general, the secretary of interior, and so forth. And the first lady pretty much has a separate operation, even though she's clearly close to the president and so forth. So a lot of people who worked in the administration may not have had a close relationship with her, but she was always there. Everybody knew that she was an invisible hand helping her husband, supporting her husband. It was truly a remarkable thing, wasn't it, John?
Yeah, it was. And Mark, too, having worked for the president, she didn't call the policy shots. That wasn't her role, and everyone knew that. But she always had his back, and I remember vividly that, when the president had only been in office less than 100 days, and he was shot at and almost killed. And from that moment forward, Mrs. Reagan, she every breathing moment of her life was spent making sure that he was protected. And she never, ever wanted to see anything like that ever happen again. So she kept her nose in the business of his security, that is for sure.
I remember in the early years in the administration, I started in that administration, I was 22 years old, and I served in a building that was on Lafayette Park, about a block or so from the White House. And I remember that day he was shot. Of course, we didn't know he was shot, but I was sitting there, and the sirens were deafening, and they were constant. And I remember turning to a colleague of mine and saying, what the hell is this, World War II? What is going on? And then, of course, had to be almost an hour later, 45 minutes later, the TV says the president's been shot. And, of course, nobody knew he almost died. Nobody had any idea. So that had an enormous impact on her, you're pointing out, as it would anyway. But in her case, she really didn't want to leave his side, ever, did she?
No, that's exactly right. And you'll recall, Mark, if you've been to the museum, you've seen that one exhibit where it shows the president's suit that was sheared off of him in the emergency room at George Washington University Hospital. And you look right there at the suit, and there's a big hole in it where the bullet passed through, and there's still blood stains surrounding the hole. Many Americans don't know this, but he lost half of his blood. He was almost... he almost died just purely on blood loss alone. So it was just by fortune and great luck that, a Secret Service agent had them turn around from heading to the White House, and they made a beeline as fast as they could to the operating room, and that's what saved his life.
She really was a special lady. She went into that White House after the Carters. She saw what a mess it was. She really wanted to upgrade it. She felt a president, a country deserved to have a house that was really in pristine condition and was in good taste. The China was a mess. They had these state dinners, and so they raised private funds to buy new matching china. She would wear loaned designer dresses.
That's right.
The media went right after her to try and create this schism between the people and these rich Hollywood right-wingers, and then they would show us the soup lines and everything. By the way, where are the soup lines today? I don't even see any soup lines today. Does it mean they don't exist? Of course not. So they created this narrative, and it would drive the president nuts. He was furious about this.
Yeah, I well recall. And just like you said, Mark, all of these things, bringing in new White House china and helping to decorate the White House, all that was done on funds that she privately raised. They weren't the taxpayer dollars, but the media at the time made it look and sound as though they were. So, but she found her moments. She went to that National Press Club event. You might remember the press dinner, and she came dressed up like a cleaning woman and sang some humorous songs, and I think she got her joke out on the media too, and I think at that point maybe they decided they needed to lay off, that she was actually a good woman, and she was able to spend most of the rest of the Reagan presidency without having to suffer too much media criticism.
And one of her main areas was her concern about young people and drug use. She was very serious about it. She traveled all over the country addressing this for many, many years, the Just Say No campaign, and it was, who knows how effective it was, but she sure as heck brought a lot of attention to it.
Absolutely. I mean, try and think of some other public service campaign that has lasted from the early 1980s. I don't know that I can name any, but now when you say Just Say No, everybody knows exactly what that's about. So she was certainly successful in getting people's attention right onto the matter, and you're right, she likely saved tens of thousands of lives.
So she's going to be buried Friday, and there'll be a service at the Reagan Library. The president's buried. Do you call that the back of the library or the front of the library?
It's the back of the library, and it's a beautiful grove of trees where the president's currently buried, and they'll roll out this large marble structure, and she'll be laid to rest within inches of him, just as they both wanted. And it'll be a sad day. It's a day of passing, and
It's an era. It's an era that's gone by now, and it's too darn bad. I wish we could grab it and pull it back. You know that, John?
Yeah, I know, and makes you kind of wish that you appreciated it more when it was there.
I have to say, when I was going through it, I really tried to.
Yeah.
And I think, but I think it's a huge mistake when we have Republicans and their surrogates going on and on. All right, that was Reagan. This day is different.
Yeah.
They sound like liberals. They sound very foolish making statements like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
John Heubusch, it's a great honor. I know how busy you folks are. Please let everybody there know how sad we are for what's happened here. And she was a great lady, and God bless you.
Hey, God bless you, Mark, and all your listeners, too. Thanks so very much.
All right, you take care. That is a wonderful man, John Heubusch. And I'll tell you more about him in the not-too-distant future, too. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.